Welcome to the show. Ain't Gonna Hurt Nobody podcast, episode 32.
32.
That's Magic Johnson, Hall of Famer.
Yeah, 32 is like my favorite age. I thought I would be like Nia Long from Love Jones when I turned 32. So riding a motorcycle, poetry slams, smoking cigarettes.
It's not too late. I got a pack of Cools menthol right here.
Oh, the menthol.
In the hoodie pocket.
Went to Indiana, okay.
And I'm about to get that motorcycle license, and I got you some goggles. So
cool. All I need is a helmet and like a straight short bob style.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom. You can do
cool,
it all.
Yeah.
You can do it all at 40. So, so ladies and gentlemen, the last, few episodes, we've really been working hard to deliver all this great stuff in 40 to 45 minutes to keep it, relatively snackable on your daily commute. And we're going to do the same for today. But today, Joy, we're getting into something serious and near and dear to us. So how about you lead us in and tell people what we're talking about today?
Sure. Well, the title of this episode is Chicago Public Schools Selective Enrollment Ain't Gonna Hurt Nobody. And the reason why we chose this episode is because we have two children. Our son Chance, who tested in, I don't remember, like 2019 to 2020, I believe. And then our daughter currently, who just turned 4, will be testing this school year to go into kindergarten, into the selective enrollment schools. That's our goal. So that I thought it was a very stressful process. I'm from Wisconsin. I had never experienced this before, and it was very overwhelming. And I'm sure there's tons of parents, even if you're from Chicago, who are still overwhelmed. Like I noticed Coley was overwhelmed. He's from Chicago. So I feel like this is just like great information to share with everyone. And that's why we picked this episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the cool things about living in the city is there's so many cool things to do, so many cool neighborhoods, so much culture. But as a parent, one of the things you quickly realize is there's not a lot of great school options in our public school system. When I say not great options, it's just statistically speaking, more schools are underperforming than are overperforming in our district. That's just what it is. That's hard quant data. No one can argue with that. So, as a parent, once you move into your beautiful dream home and in your transitioning neighborhood, like a Bronzeville where we spent a lot of years, you look up and realize it's time for your kid to go to kindergarten, and you're like, I don't want to send them to any of these options. So that leaves you down 3 paths, right? You can just send your kid to an underperforming school,
Which is a neighborhood school.
Yep. B, you can drop $15,000 a year on a private school.
15 grand or more.
Or more. Or more, depending on what you like. Or C, you can do the route we did and put our children through the selective enrollment process. I am a product of the selective enrollment process. Going to Whitney Young, the best school there is, was, and ever will be.
But you didn't do that in elementary.
That is true. I did not do it at 4. I did it at 14.
14.
But it was a much different process, and it's real. But there's over 600 and almost
649 schools.
649 schools in the Chicago Public Schools District, and of those, only 39 fall into the selective enrollment pool, and that's effectively a pool schools where their pool of students all test in, and they test at a level that's at least the 70th percentile or higher in order to
in math and reading
to get into these schools. And it just creates a culture of learning, and it's an environment that makes these schools desirable. So, one of the things we really want to take time with this episode is we have 6 important nuggets that we want to impart for people as they get ready to embark on this journey, and really what to do after the testing journey, because that's just the on-ramp. That's just the on-ramp that we're talking about here. So, here's 6 things you should know. 6 things you should know about before and after taking the CPS selective enrollment test. First and foremost thing for those taking the kindergarten test, the test is 100% verbal.
Verbal, 100%.
100% verbal, all spoken, no written components. Because guess what? Most 4-year-olds can't write.
Yeah. And so, keep going.
Yeah, so most 4-year-olds can't write. So here you have this highly important test because it's going to dictate really your family finances, your daily commute, and really some, potential outcomes for you and your child over the next, 8 to 12 years as you think about high school, right? So the reality is, there's only so much you can do for this test as you get your kids ready. You could, pay for the great daycares. You could do the test prep. You can, drill your kids. But the honest truth is, if your kid is talkative and takes easy to strangers, they'll probably do better than those that don't, regardless of aptitude.
And you really don't know how your kid's going to feel that day. Like, I mean, our daughter, like, if she's in that mood where she's, like, clinging onto your leg and, like, doesn't want to go, like, it's a complete and total stranger. So you have to keep in mind, like, the person they're going to meet is a complete and total stranger. It might be someone that they've never seen before. Like, and also, like, with the test, they train you as hard as you want to as a parent. You can ask your child, what did they ask you? What was on the test? And you could tell, like, I don't know what they did. They do the Man in Black wine, but the kid does not remember what was on the test, or what they say is like something completely random. And you're just like, yo, I don't know if you did good, bad. Like, yeah, whales are great. Okay. Like, what, it was, I think Chance said, like, they asked me what animal was great. And I said elephants. Or it was something like that.
It was something like that. But like, you don't know if it was, they showed them flashcards. You don't know if they just asked them off the top of the head.
You don't know the structure, nothing.
And no one knows, right? And I think that's what makes it a little stressful. But one of the things we want to tell you is it doesn't matter. Your child's going to perform how they perform
on that day.
Yeah, because you've done the work before then, and if they do, they do. And don't worry, we'll talk about your options if they don't perform on the test. Because there is hope. There definitely is a light for your child still to get into a high performing good school, even if they don't knock this test out of the park. So number one, first and foremost, your kindergarten test is verbal. It's important to note, and we'll get into this a little bit more. Future years, when your children do know how to write, it will be a written test. And we know this because our son Chance took the test again in first grade, and those were written tests. And again, Tommy Lee Jones popped out from somewhere with that Men in Black light, and he couldn't tell us a single thing that he did on that test, remembered if he wrote his name. And none of the other kids either, because we heard other parents asking their kids. So we don't know what they do to those kids. We don't know if they just give them candy or give them $1 afterwards.
Idea.
They gave him $1. I haven't seen that money yet.
And the only thing, too, I would add is, like, kids pick up on your stress. And I know it's a big deal. Like, literally, we were, like, considering moving because we didn't know, like, what was going to happen with our son. That's a lot of pressure on the parent and the child. But you really don't want to try to put that on the child. Like, you don't want to try to bribe them. You just want to make it, like, an exciting thing. Like, something we did. We walked to where the test was going to be. We took our son, like, up the elevator, like, where the test was going to be. We walked
weeks
him
before
around.
the actual
weeks
test.
Before. Like, and we were just like, you're going to have so much fun at this test. Like, we tried to, like, hype it up, but we didn't bribe them.
We tried to encourage and let them know, hey, you're going to get to show somebody brand new how smart you are. And they're going to love it. It was just letting him know you're going to meet somebody new. High likelihood they'll come from an ethnicity or background your child may have not encountered yet. So you hype them up on how exciting that experience is going to be and meeting someone different for the first time, right? So it's all of those fun things that we try to impart in them going into that test. Anything to not make them feel stressed or make them feel like, if you do this, I got something for you, because they'll be focused on that carrot you're dangling in front of them if you don't play it right.
Yeah.
So number one, the test is verbal. The second thing we feel is important you should know before taking the test is check your scores when you receive them. So the kindergarten test, when you take it, you're going to receive 2 sets of scores. One is going to be for classical schools, which will be a reading and a math score, and that applies to your classical schools. And then your second score set will be for gifted schools. So they're 2 completely different scores. Some children will test high in both categories. Some children will absolutely knock the classical out the park and not do as well in gifted. Some children will knock the gifted out of the park and not do as well on the classical, right? Because they're 2 different tests, and gifted does not mean smarter. It's just a word used to describe these
how the child thinks,
right? It might be their process and how they get there, so they might lean more towards gifted. Where classical, you don't want to say it just falls in the logical and reason in your traditional kind of root memory and arithmetic and writing, but they're just the traditional learning methods that we knew. So there's going to be 2 test scores that you receive, no matter what. And CPS no longer shares it on your readout, but there's a minimum score that must be achieved to be even considered for a selective enrollment school. I know the classical score, when Chance took it, you had to be, and it's percentiles. So you're tested against kids taking the test that year. So if your child's going to test in the 90th percentile in reading and 90th in math. That's a 90th percentile for each of those scores that particular year. But if you don't hit at least a 70th percentile in one of them, you're automatically out. So your child can get a 99 in reading and a 68 in math. They were out.
They're not considered.
They're not considered. We don't know the gifted off the top, and CPS doesn't publish it, but subscribe to our Instagram page and follow our YouTube and come back and we'll find it and we'll give it to you.
And just because of, I like how we're saying there are different scores, because when you are selecting your schools on the application, which we'll get to later, it's important to not only just put classical schools and not only put gifted schools, because you really don't know how your child's going to do. And just to add to the classical school, those schools typically are 1 grade level ahead. So if your child is going into kindergarten, they'll be doing first grade work. And then the classical schools also have like more like an art component, more like,
correct,
like arts. I don't know. I don't have a good way to explain the gifted and how they go, but I know like they might have like a 3rd grader who's like at a 7th grade level in math. Like they more do like small group work because the students are on so many different levels.
Yeah, I mean, the way, when coming up doing some research for this episode, the way I found it, right, the gifted is going to focus more on critical thinking, logical reasoning, problem solving, and creativity, right? Where the classical is going to focus more on literature, mathematics, language arts, world language, and humanities, right? So it's the way your child processes the world. It's not a measure of intelligence. It's the way your child processes information, because, we've had the fortune of experiencing both schools for full academic years. And what we notice is there's a bunch of brilliant kids at both schools. Like not, we can't say kids are smarter at one school than the other. We can say the curriculum is different. The approach to the kids are different. Like the mindset and mentality are somewhat different. Just in some ways, you can't say that gifted kids are more social or classical kids are more social. We can't necessarily say that, but it really just falls into like how they approach the world. Like from my perspective, gifted kids see things very logically. I don't want to say black and white, but that's just my very, very novice, like non-educational background things. Like it's a very black and white thing, and I feel like the classical kids kind of like, well, we can figure it out. It's pretty close, right?
Yeah, and the irony is that I would say the complete and total opposite.
Exactly.
So I don't think I can't really speak on it too much, but the main point is there's 2 different scores. You want to make sure that you put classical and gifted schools on your list, because you don't know what your child is going to do. That's something
100%. Which takes us to point number 3, which is highly important. You must rank schools on your application. So the Chicago Public Schools Selective Enrollment application allows you, as of right now, as of this date, allows you to choose 6 selective enrollment schools. So these schools will be throughout the entire city of Chicago. Currently, our son is at Keller Regional Gifted Center, which is on the far southwest side. But he has classmates that come from all over the city, bus all over the city to get there. He also went to Bronzeville Classical, a great school that was in Bronzeville that was up the street from our house. Both schools are quality options that we liked. We liked both principals, the leadership, and the curriculum and the teachers. That's working out really well. But, I'm drifting here a little bit. But just as you think about that application, you want to attend all of these open houses. You want to check out the physical environment,
go to the open house,
understand the commute. The teachers there, they tend to stay at these schools. That's the one thing. There's a lot of continuity there. They tend to stay for years. So you'll get to meet your kindergarten teacher, your first grade teacher.
Because they're exceptionally well run. I mean, that's why.
Correct.
It's a good school. A lot of it's very competitive. They have like the highest teachers because a lot of teachers want to be there. But I would also say with the schools is make sure you check out the culture of the schools. In my opinion, if once you have your list of 6 schools, I would recommend popping in on a couple of days. Don't just go to the open house. Like, just like pop in, see how the office is run. See, because you're not at the open house, they're really going to put their best foot forward, and you're really not going to be able to see the culture of the school. And that's something you kind of do want to see, just so you can get an idea of, like, is this a good fit for your child? So for me, I actually I substitute taught at every single school, so I could see, like, really what the schools were about and what it was like behind the scenes. You might not be able to do that, but you might be able to do, like, a pop-in visit or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, COVID made it a little tough the last few years, so you know, each school will be different, but definitely get to the open houses. Ideally, hopefully, there's someone in your circle who has attended those schools, or their children are, and they have good or bad things to say to help you make your list. So the importance of ranking the schools, the way it works, you rank your schools, and then based on the score that we spoke on earlier, your child will get into your first choice. So if you pick one gifted school, if you pick your first choice is a gifted school and your second choice is a classical school, it's not like you get to choose from one or the other. Whichever you rank first, because they don't distinguish the rankings between gifted and classical, it's just based on your preference. So that's the one you'll get offered first if your child tested well. So if you really don't want to go to that school, if that's your second choice, don't put it number one, because you don't necessarily get an option. If you decline that option, you run the risk of not getting another offer into a selective enrollment school. On the flip of that, we know people that have, they didn't get into their first choice or their second choice, and they got their offer for their third, and they've declined it, and luckily got back into their first. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, what to do afterwards. So it's important to rank the school that you want your child to go to first. Like, that should be your number one choice, followed by your second. So take the commute. Like, you have to factor that in. Like,
school start time.
Yeah, not every school offers busing. Some schools have stricter geographic boundaries. I think the regional gifted centers will pick up from wherever, just because there's fewer of those even within that subset of the 39 selective enrollment schools, right? So you have to think about that very critically. You also need to, I'm a gamer in Vegas. You need to, like, hedge your bets. You can't put all your eggs in one basket or one school or two schools. Like, use all 6 choices. Even if you don't get it, just use all 6 choices. Like, it's not going to hurt you. Like, you could still say no once you get that choice.
But it will hurt you if you only put one and your kid doesn't get in. It's like, even though there's only like 39, I shouldn't say only, but there's only 39 classical and gifted schools. I mean, they're the top level schools in the city.
Correct.
It makes sense.
And really in the country.
Yeah, really, some of them in the country. Put all 6 down. And also just keep in mind that the commute does make a difference, especially if you have more than one child. Like, we have friends who have a child all the way on the north side, another child's at a school on the south side. Like, just because you have one child gets in, if you have multiple children, that does not guarantee your second child will get in that exact same school.
Correct.
Like, it's no sibling hookups. Like, it doesn't work like that.
Correct. So again, we had the good fortune, with our first child, he got into our first choice the first time. So it wasn't controversy, but we have another kid coming up, and we're taking notes on our own advice. We best believe we filled out our application. Best believe we have 6 choices. Unfortunately, not all of them are from a commute standpoint, the best options or friendly, but we see people who are driving 20 plus miles a day to drop off one child, and then they still have another drop off, and they do it again. So it's important that we consider what's important.
And a majority too, like, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but a majority of the classical schools start early. They have early start times. That's something that I did. Like, majority start at 7:45. Like, our son's school, he starts at 7:30 a.m. Like, it's just like things I know it's great to say, oh, my child goes here, but like, you really want to make sure it works for you, because you want everybody to be happy.
Yeah.
And you want it to be like copacetic.
Yeah, and some start at 9, and the irony is, some of the top ranked ones start at 9, and the irony is you still have to get to work after you get your child to school. There's no bus service.
And it's that pickup too.
Yeah, if there's no after school program, you can find yourself in a pickle. So That 7:30 start, it is brutal in the morning. It's going to it's even more brutal when you have snow on the ground, as we learned last year, driving to and fro every day. But we were rarely late to work because that got our butts out the bed and on pace to get him there. So by default, we got there on time. So it helped. So just use all 6 of your choices and use them wisely. So let's get to our fourth point. You need to choose your choice schools. Like, you need to consider choice schools. So CPS, their infinite wisdom to make it, to give us even more options, right? You have what we've spent the majority of the show talking about, which are the selective enrollment schools. These are schools you must test in. As Joy mentioned, there's no sibling preference. So because one of your children tests in, you're not automatically granted admission, right? Mm-hmm. I believe all of the selective enrollment schools, when CPS had, their prior ranking system, all fell within level 1+, which is the highest ranking you can get at CPS. Yeah. Several of the schools, we're fortunate to have our son at Annie Keller, which was rated by School Digger as the #1 overall school in the state, not just within CPS, not within the city and the state, right? Several CPS selective enrollment schools fall in the top 10 and swap spots, right? Several of the overall fall within the top 100. So you have to think about it's important. But the good news is CPS has choice schools, and these are our neighborhood schools, our magnet schools, which have no test requirement to get in. So on the application, you get 20 choices for choice schools.
Wait, can you repeat? How many do you get?
20.
So then that means not only should you should also put 6 selective, but you should put the choice schools because they're giving you choice.
They're giving you choice of 20 neighborhood and magnet schools that you can basically buy a lottery ticket for to see if your child get in. If you don't fall within the geographic boundary of one of these choice schools, your child can still get admission. We're not going to list all the ones you should go to or not to. We're not trying to pit one school versus another. We're not going to do that. But there's choice schools that if we did not test in the selective enrollment via the choice program, we got those options as well. And these, again, are top 100 schools in the state of Illinois.
They're good. They're really good schools.
Excellent.
Yeah,
options,
they're really good.
And there's excellent, even though there's only 10 options, all in on the south side. Maybe. Per the level 1+ rating or whatever we have, there's still quality options. And the good news with those schools, if you have other siblings, you automatically get sibling preference there.
Yeah, and also a side thing for if there's any teachers out there, if you teach at the choice schools, your child automatically can go. If it's a well-run, you can go, you can work at the school, both of your kids can go. So it's something to consider. The only other thing I will say about the choice, I just want to distinguish between magnet, or Coley, can you distinguish between a magnet, when you're saying a magnet school, what does that mean?
Exactly. So magnet schools again, they pull students in through different measures. Some automatically get in based on a geographic boundary. So some people in some neighborhoods, in the case of, think of magnet school that most of us know if you go to the north side is Disney. So there's some people that can get in via a geographic boundary. So they might have they might have their neighborhood school option as well as a magnet school. But then the magnet school pulls a high number of kids from different areas that are agnostic of geographic boundaries, and you have a high quality education experience, right? You pull in a diverse set of kids because you have kids coming from all over the city. Typically, your choice schools are neighborhood schools, so probably 85 to 90% of those kids will be from that area. With a magnet school, they're pulling in from all over the city.
And they have a certain amount of seats for someone who's in the neighborhood, someone who's traveling from here. They have the sibling slots. It's
correct.
But it's, so it's just there is a difference between there are just choice schools, and then there are the magnet schools, which are open to a wider, they throw a wider net or whatever.
Yeah, they cast a wider net. So you bring that in there. So again, a lot of you might be looking at us what makes you guys experts? Why do you think you know everything about this? The answer is we don't know everything.
Yeah.
Right? What we're trying to do is we walked into this experience coming from a zero, point of inertia. We knew nothing. We were fortunate to have our daycare. They had I'll call it, they had a night where they had parents from all, from the key selective enrollment schools. They came in and spoke on behalf of the schools. So we got to know about that. They prepped us for the test and kind of let us know, they
Yeah.
gave us good insight in terms of not making your kids nervous, making sure you schedule your tests at a time where they're not sleepy. If your kids tend to get sleepy around 1, 2 o'clock, they fall asleep in the car.
Yeah.
Probably don't want to schedule your test at that time. If your kid is like brighten up, 8, 9, probably want to try to get a 9 a.m. test slide. So we don't know everything, but we got a lot of battle scars to show for the process. They've calloused, and we're about to go through this process again with our baby girl, with our princess. And I'm excited because I feel like I'm armed with knowledge. It's not a perfect process. It's not ideal, but it's the hand we've been dealt living in Chicago. And what makes it even cooler is Joy, as you know, is an educator, but, she kind of hinted to it. The year she had after having Bella before she went back to work full time, she got to substitute teach, and she got to see each and every one of the schools that were on our list. Of the, I think you subbed at all of all of our selective enrollment choices, and then I think 8 of the choice selections we had. It was a pretty high volume of schools that you got the inside track in.
Yeah, and too, I mean, I do work for CPS, so I have I ask a lot of questions, but I think primarily what you want to see, you don't have to work for CPS to know. I just feel like it's really important that you know your child and you think like, what will work best for my child? You want to see, how does a school run? How does it treat black boys? I have a black son. I know a school might have a great name, but I want to see when I went in, I wanted to see how are the black boys performing? Were they always getting in trouble? Were they on task? Were the teachers always calling their name? Or were the teachers not picking on the black children? Because that also is a thing that black children are not picked on for answers, even if they know. You want to see that equity piece, especially if you're a person of color. It's very, very important. I also would say there's some choice schools that are STEM focused. If you have a child that's really into STEM, science, experiments, some of the STEM schools are really good, and your child might have a better experience at that choice school. You just want to think about your child. You want to think about, you don't want to be I know my child is gifted and then only put gifted schools, because you really, I know I said this already, but you really don't. And you really don't want to, because it's very stressful if your child gets in not a one school, and then you're kicking yourself because you're like, dang, I didn't put as many down as I really could have.
Yep.
And now you're stressing out because them schools be full. Even the private schools, private schools be full, and you usually don't get the test results till spring. So a lot of those schools that were your Plan B schools, those slots might be gone. So you do want to hedge your bets, and you want to make sure you put as many options as you want to, because you could just say no. But when you don't have an option, you can't say you don't have an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing, we have friends whose children, didn't test into selective enrollment, kindergarten, first grade, found a great STEM school like Joy said, and they've since tested into selective enrollment schools, and they're like, well, I'm not moving them because this STEM experience that they're going through at this particular school is awesome, and that I'm seeing stuff out of them that I'm liking. So, who's to say the selective enrollment school will be the right choice for you? But, as you go through this process, you just need to keep all your options open. You really need to keep them open. And then I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that sibling preference is important, because I've seen families, we considered moving to Oak Park. I've seen families do it when one child tests here and the other doesn't, because
what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
That's your reality, right? You have to face it. So that's important there. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 more important points for you. So we are going to go into point number 5, and that's the scores are weighted differently. So this is going to be a deep one, and try to follow me here. I wish I had the teller thing where I can write the stuff and it would show up on the screen, but we're going to get there soon. But when you think about the test scores, right? We already talked about the 2 sets of scores. You're going to get your gifted score. You're going to get your classical score. They're all going to be percentiles, right? Your child is in the 99th percentile. Your child is in the 65th percentile, whatever that is. So that's only one component of admission. So it's not that CPS just rounds up all the 99th percentile children and place them in a school. No.
That would be too easy.
No. So, how the exact breakdown, it changes from year to year, but about 30% of those slots are open for the 99th percentile kids. So again, remember, a classroom might have about 30 slots open. So of those slots, 10 of those will be held for the best performing kids whose parents selected that school as number one. So if your child scored in the 99th percentile in reading and math.
Reading and math.
Correct. And they put that score number one, they will be considered first.
And before you keep going, I'm not going to assume anything, but I just want to explain the percentile. So basically what that means, out of all the 4-year-olds that are testing, your child scored, if they're in the 99th percentile, that means only like 1% score better than them out of all those 4-year-olds. If they're in the 80th percentile, that means 20% of those 4-year-olds scored higher than your child. So just like, that's how the percentile breaks down. I just wanted to explain that.
Absolutely. So then you have to look at the rest of the slots. So what you don't know is your address that you put on your application falls into a socioeconomic measure that CPS uses. So back in the day, I'll say back when I went to high school, ethnicity played a role. Yeah. So there were, I don't even want to say affirmative action quotas, but there were ethnic quotas that had to be hit for selective enrollment schools back in the day. Those are no longer the case. What they do is they take socioeconomic tiers. So, for example, a child who lives in the South Loop or Lincoln Park, that's considered tier 4. That's the highest socioeconomic tier you can get. I'll call it the more affluent neighborhoods. You get into your Bronzeville, parts of Hyde Park, those fall into tier 3.
Not all parts of Bronzeville fall into tier 3. Well, there are certain neighborhoods that are tier 4.
Yes, and those areas are technically not Bronzeville. Those are Douglas, as we came to learn the hard way, because you find out one side of the street is tier 3, one side is tier 4. So when you take that socioeconomic factor into play, what starts to happen is there's certain slots that are open at each school for kids within the 4 tiers. So if you can have a child who is tier 1, who scores, there's so many slots open for that. You following me here? Yep. So we have kids that just test well, and then you have these socioeconomic slots. And then you have a weighting that happens. So a kid who is in a tier 1, because statistically they're in a more disadvantaged call it socioeconomic situation, they're not necessarily looking for their score to be in the 99s, right? It's weighted a little bit differently. So it's not, so that's the equity measure that's really taken in place when these scores are happening. So your CPS has a website. There's an app like CPS Tier Maps. If you Google that, there's a CPS run website where you can put in your address, and it'll tell you your socioeconomic tier, and it'll show you the geographic boundary of where that is. Typically, most Black and Hispanic neighborhoods are falling into tiers 3, 2, and 1. Most your more affluent neighborhoods are falling into tier 4. And it's not just necessarily about money or status. It's a number of things. It's census data, it's employment data, all that fun stuff that goes into getting to this tier number. So that's taken into consideration. The other thing you have to know that's taken into consideration is your test date, right? Somebody that takes the test in November versus somebody who takes the test in March.
Right. So, okay. So, I mean, basically, like, they're going to weigh it differently if the child took the test right away when the test window opens and they take the test than a child that took it, let's say, in March, because technically that child had more time to prepare. They may have learned, who knows if they learn more, but they just take into consideration the time of when they took the test and when the child is born, like when their birthday is. Like our daughter Bella, her birthday is August 27th, so she's going to be like the youngest in her kindergarten class, whereas if you have a child born in December, they weigh it off of that as well.
Because it's not, the expectation is, especially at that age, an additional 10 months of development, the expectation is this child should be at a certain level versus a child with 10 less months of development. Because the thinking is at some point, those extra 10 months, it reaches kind of a plateau where you'll be at the same playing field. But at this age, the expectation is there. So your late B day versus early B day, a early test versus a late test, those all play into it.
Right.
Most would argue that, take the test as late as you can so your child can do as well. No one really knows, right? Because CPS doesn't publish the rubric, but these are all things. So your child's hard quant scores, how they actually perform, your socioeconomic status, and how many of those slots that are actually left open, especially based on, the tiers of the neighborhood. And then you get into the actual weighting based on your test date and your birthday. So it's kind of complicated there, but you should know all of these things as you're going in. And I think, when we do our home buying episode, we'll talk more about that as well, because it plays into that, right? Because the quality of your neighborhood school and the proximity to good schools plays heavily into your home value, right? So it's something to consider as people are making serious investments in homes, or why you see a lot of things playing out in the news and politics about having a selective enrollment, more selective enrollment high school options available as these areas have turned over. I want to say gentrified, but as you have more mixed income opportunities, more higher earners coming into, historically redlined areas, we have to look at now that you have people with high earning jobs living here, how do you provide these? What is that educational equity measure? Yeah. If you're living downtown, Juarez on on Augusta and Ashland, that's your neighborhood high school. It's either that or Dunbar. But you're living, you're living down there in the South Loop on Indiana near Soldier Field, and that's your school option. And then CPS enrollment numbers are down because people are literally choosing not to go to CPS schools. They'd rather go to a private school if they don't feel their neighborhood options are viable.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody knows property value increases with a good quality school. If that's the main things families are looking for, they want a good quality school. That's if you look at a lot of how home descriptions, it'll be great school, and then it'll be
district. Yeah.
Yeah, but a side thing about the tiers, and I just want to break it down, is that if you're thinking about it this way, if you're in a tier 4 neighborhood, you might have a child who was in a tier 2 who scored lower than your child, and your child won't get in because of those slots, even though your child may have scored or done better than that child, but it is certain seats. So if you have a kindergarten class, that's why the next point is about what happens next. But if your child does not get in, you have to think about there's only a certain amount of kindergarten classrooms. Some of these selective enrollment schools only have one kindergarten class, so that's maybe 26 seats, maybe 28. You got a certain amount that's going to the 99th percentile. You got a certain amount that's going for each tier.
Yep.
So it is playing the lottery or a gamble, because it's really just not enough seats and not enough options, but that's just how the city is set up. But
yeah.
I just want people to really realize don't beat yourself. I shouldn't say don't beat yourself up, because it's disappointing. It's disappointing. No one's going to sugarcoat that, but it's challenging because it's just a lot of components that are coming into a 4-year-old. They got to speak well at the test. Their age plays a part. When they take the test plays a part. Where they live plays a part. I mean, dang.
Yeah. And I think it's easy as a parent to feel if I messed up if one of these things don't click, but that's not the case at all, because I think, Joy, you summed it up and gave a great segue into point number 6. It's not over if your child doesn't test in. Not by a long shot.
Yeah,
not by a long shot. So, we talked a little bit earlier. There are minimum thresholds that you must hit while taking that selective enrollment test. Again, for the classical, you had to be, if any of your scores fell below the 70th percentile, you were out, and there is a classical number. But if your child is within range, just know there's always people who are declining options, so seats become open. There's always people, where one school might have been your number one, that's somebody's number four, so they'll decline for that reason in the hopes they'll be waitlisted for another school that they liked. Or they might have got a choice option that they're really happy with that they didn't think they could get. And they're like, oh, well, I can send my kid to Disney. I'd much rather do that than have to, chug all the way out to the West Loop every day. No, thank you, right? So that happens,
yeah.
right? So we've heard stories of parents getting offers the second week of school.
Yeah.
You hear me? Like, offers start coming in May. We've heard offers be extended the second week of school in September, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely not over by any stretch. Another important part for us, this isn't a measure of your child's intelligence or the quality of the choices and decisions you made bringing them up. Again, the kindergarten test is a verbal test that a 4-year-old is doing with a stranger that you can't prepare them for. No one can tell you what's on that test. There's websites that are out there that will promise that, hey, this is what you need to get your child ready for. And you don't even know how your child's performing. It's not like you get a video recording of it later. You just don't know what's happening in there. So you can't take it personal if your child doesn't get in. What you can do is make sure you filled out all 20 of your choice options. Make sure that you use all of your 6 selective enrollment options. Make sure you hedge so you have those options.
Yeah, and also keep testing your child. That's what I highly recommend, because Chance does go to Keller, but Keller doesn't start till 1st grade.
Correct.
So for kindergarten, he went to Brownsville Classical. Then we tested him again, and he got into Keller. So you can continually test your child, and you never know. Maybe for that 1st grade test, they might perform different because it is a paper test.
Correct.
I will continue to test your child, especially I feel like by 3rd grade, you kind of want them to be settled, because 3rd grade is a promotional grade. So that's a grade where if students don't perform at a certain level, they are retained or held back. Mm-hmm. So you do want your child to be set by 3rd grade.
Yeah.
But up until that point, I feel like continue to test if that's something you feel like you really want for your child, and you feel like that's the best route for them. But again, test anxiety is real. Tons of people have test anxiety. It's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, it's just not for everybody. It's just it's really not.
Correct. And again, private schools are viable options. A lot of us spend a lot of bread on these daycares, so you might have to do it another year, or you might want to do it another year. I also want to let people know, there are plenty of good CPS options. I don't want it to come off that there's not enough good options. It's just the one that's most convenient to you, or the one that you might have envisioned when you bought your house might not be an option, right? So I think it's reality, because people do move. I mean, we moved kind of hedging. We don't know how our daughter's going to perform on the test, but we feel confident, at a minimum, as we sit here today, in the neighborhood school option, but before we've done a tour. But that our hearts and our minds might change after seeing the school. We might not like it. We might want to put all of our put more of our eggs in the choice basket, in the event that she does not test, because statistically speaking, it's almost, you don't want to say it's like hitting the lottery, but it's very hard to get your child in. We know people who have tested in the 99th percentile in both areas did not get in because they had gifted schools as their top choices, right? So that's why you have to be very careful with your selection, your criteria, or their child might have bombed on the gifted test and not the classical. So it happens all sorts of ways within this. You'd be surprised how many websites. There's a website, Chicago School Options, that's just dedicated to parent forums on this exact topic, where people are sharing their admission stories and sharing what test scores they got in their neighborhoods here, just so people can track, do I even have a chance to get into this? There's a lot that's happening there.
And there's on that forum too, it's parents who are oh, I put Brownsville Classical. I don't know if I want to send my child there. I live in Lincoln Park, stuff like that. It's all kinds of information that you can kind of get a gauge of what's going on. But again, make sure to continue to test if this is something that you want to do, because people move away, people move. And for me, I wanted to change our neighborhood because it was just too stressful. Again, like I said, I'm from Wisconsin. We were either going to go to the suburbs where I knew my child just got in, easy peasy, we done, or we needed to go to a neighborhood where it was a quality neighborhood school, just in case, just to see, because however things pan out, you
Yeah.
know, like I needed that reassurance for myself. You might not need it because the level of competitiveness that occurs because of this. Like people have, like we've lost friends. Like people don't talk to when they kid don't get in. Yeah, A school, boom, boom, bang, bang. We buddies. They kid don't get in. Your kid does. Things it hit different. Like for real, it's different. It's like very competitive.
Yeah. And I think too, people do move. Like we see people in all sorts of suburbs, but you start to do that math, you might have to pay an extra 12 G's in taxes, but people are like, you know what, I got 3 kids. It makes sense. I'll pay this extra 12 G's. I'll do these suburbs. As soon as I graduate, I'm back in the city, or I'll figure out what life is. So it comes at you hard. When you're in it, you're so nearsighted and so focused on it, you don't realize like it's going to be okay. Like no matter what happens, it's going to be okay for your child. I think, the city, they know this is a problem. They know they need to come up with more quality options to retain top talent, because you have a lot of great teachers in Chicago public schools beyond the one sitting next to me, but she's not in the classroom anymore, right?
Yeah,
She's gone on to bigger and better, all within the same district. I think it's important though to know that like it's something the school is actively working on. They're constantly optimizing this procedure. They want to open more schools. They hear us. You have to get involved with your local school councils, even if your kid doesn't go to that school, so you understand what's going on, because it impacts your neighborhood. It helps your property values. So, stick with it. So, Joy, we're at a little bit over 45 minutes, so we did it. I would have lost all bets. I thought we were going to go an hour and a half based on conversations we had. But, we like to wrap every show with things we wish we would have known. So would you like to go first, or you want me to go first?
Sure. I'll go first. I think primarily the thing I wish I would have known is how important selecting your home, how much your home and the home that you choose to buy is connected to the school. At the time when we purchased our properties, they both were, in happened to be in neighborhoods that did not have a neighborhood school. It never crossed my mind to purchase my home in an area that had a quality neighborhood school and had a classical school, or may have a magnet school. The thing I wish I would have known is when you purchase your home, even if you think you'll never have kids in life, just you don't know what could happen, and take into consideration your school. And the only second thing I'm going to say is things I wish I would have known is how a little, I don't want to say corrupt, but unjust it is that there are very few quality neighborhood schools on the south side of Chicago and west side, where a majority of Black people live. As someone who went to college, has a pretty good job, we bought a home and spent all this money in a home, and now I don't have a school. And then on top of it, my home is not going to sell for the same amount as someone in Lincoln Park who has a quality school has multiple. If you live in Lincoln Park, you got like 4 really high ranked neighborhood schools to go to. Plus you got the classicals and gifted.
Not even sweating that test. They're not even taking it.
So I feel like I wish I would have known that just about kind of the setup of Chicago in a way, because it's like, what's going on? Like, how is this going to get improved? And I know it's kind of philosophical, but I just feel like it really does need to be said. The fact that there are very few quality neighborhood schools. I'm not getting the property value. I have a bigger house than someone on the north side. They're going to get more money than I'm going to get for my home. And my child ain't got a school. It don't make sense. So that's something I wish that is something I wish I would have known.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think you took 2, so you took mine within your 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But that's neither here nor there.
Oh,
but
man.
I wish I would have known as germane to this topic is just the socioeconomic measure that goes within it. It all goes into understanding your neighborhood school. Those of you that know, I worked in the legal cannabis business, helping people get licensed here in Illinois. And what's crazy to me is, what they consider the disproportionately impacted areas, like the DIAs, when you were filling out the cannabis applications. That's one of the qualifications you needed in order to be considered a social equity candidate. those same exact neighborhoods are the tier 1, 2, and 3 neighborhoods for CPS. So think how deep that is, right? Like when you fill out the cannabis application, you got more scores if you had, 51% of your ownership, more than 50% of your ownership, who lived in an area that was deemed to be more impacted by the war on drugs. And those areas fall on the south and west side. Let's call it what it is. At the same time, the level in CPS, your tier 1, 2, and 3 schools, which happen to have very few level 1+ schools, to Joy's point, they all fall within the same impact area as a cannabis application. It's an identical map. I don't think anybody overlaid it because when I was doing screeners and putting in people's address, I'm like, that's a tier 3 neighborhood because that's up the street from me. Boom, this is a tier 2. Okay, let me just see what schools over here. Just out of curiosity, the two things are interconnected. It all goes to equity and access and investment. Chicago is my city. I love it. I was fortunate to be a product of Chicago Public Schools, but we need to get the parents, we need to get these incentives, we need to make these schools like the center of these communities so people understand like the importance they have on not only your life today, but in the future. Because if not, with that type of erosion, that's less economic investment and development in your community because it starts with the school. If your school's on point, that's going to bring more police, more patrol. That's going to bring beautification in the park. That's going to bring the parents around. That's going to bring people from other neighborhoods who just like will be in your neighborhood and invest to make it great. It's important, though, that these areas where we're hearing about there's 12 schools that is, 12 students at particular schools and all the crazy things we heard the first few weeks of school, that shit got to stop. Like, because it's hurting us. Like, it's hurting us. It's only going to hurt us more in this city. Like that's why this population is dwindling, and we got to do something about it. So,
yeah. So, are you saying basically that the connection is that when a school is low performing, you have more drugs, crime, and things of that nature? Is that kind of like
typically just is it cause and effect? I'm not going to come here and say that. That's not what this show is about. But it's in front of us. It's in front of us. Put that cannabis DIA map over the CPS tier map. You'll be like, holy shit. So, yeah. Well, hope this show wasn't too heavy. Hope you guys took something away from it all.
Yeah, we tried our best.
We tried our best, but this was a resource we wish we would have had 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's going to be here forever for everyone. So
you're welcome.
Yeah. That's our show. Ain't Gonna Hurt Nobody podcast.
Peace.
Yeah.